Hey everyone, welcome back to the YMyHealth Podcast. I'm your co-host Melissa Schenkman here, and we're going to be talking about a topic that a lot of people experience but might not realize they're experiencing, which is moral injury. And to be our guide in moral injury and how to navigate it is Emily Labutta. She's here with us, and she is a licensed associate professional counselor from Atento Counseling in the Metro Atlanta area. And we're really excited to have you here, Emily.
Thank you so much for having me, Melissa. It's a really important topic that I don't think gets talked about enough, but definitely gets experienced. So I'm glad we're having this discussion.
Likewise, likewise. And I think moral injury kind of came on the scene, really kind of, I'd say 2020, later in 2020, 2021, all really associated with the pandemic because healthcare workers were experiencing it. But you do not have to be a healthcare worker to experience moral injury. It is something that you can experience in a lot of different settings. And I think since that kind of the term, came up, people started realizing, oh, actually, I've experienced moral injury, or perhaps this is moral injury. And that's why I think it's just so important for us to talk about that and kind of guide our community in that as well. So just kind of to start, what is moral injury and how did this concept kind of come about?
Absolutely. So if we look at what moral injury is, it's often when we are forced to do something, forced to not do something, or forced to observe something that goes against our values. So we see this, like you said, in hospital settings, in, crisis care management. We see this with EMS, law enforcement. We see this with veterans. We could also see this in corporations at work when your boss says do X, and now you're stuck between doing X, which violates your values, or losing your job.
Um, Absolutely. And I know many people listening can relate to this very much so. Um, what does it mean to sustain a moral injury?
So it would be really any of those situations, but then it's kind of like also what comes out of it. So just like if we think of comparing this to PTSD, for instance, somebody can experience a traumatic event, but not necessarily develop PTSD. PTSD
Mm,
is largely tied to whether we had support afterwards, how our nervous system responded to the event. So, two people could get in a car accident. One person develops PTSD and one person doesn't. Moral injury is similar in the sense of it's our response or our um, kind of psychological experience of what happened to us. So if you are in one of those situations where you feel forced to do, not do, or observe, and then develop shame, guilt, this sense of identity questioning, who am I now? That is that kind of moral injury piece.
okay.
Absolutely. Yes. We see some overlap with symptoms of burnout and vicarious trauma. That our vicarious trauma is something experienced in the helping, caring professions. So it's sometimes tricky to parse out. Not everyone is going to see it, not everyone is going to recognize it for what it is because this is that thing that could just be, oh, you're kind of tired of seeing everything that you've been seeing without enough care coming into you. But it can also be, oh, you've been put in enough situations over enough time that this is slowly wearing down your idea of yourself and your values and how you show up in the world. So moral injury is much more subtle and can look and overlap with a lot of other things.
That's very interesting about the burnout. That is one I had not thought about. And I know we had the privilege of having you on for an entire episode dedicated to burnout
Mm.
in May, which I highly encourage everyone to listen to if you've not listened to that episode yet. But that's very interesting because I think a lot of people might not realize that that there is a possibility for both moral injury and burnout to overlap in ways. And I know you were mentioning PTSD as well. Kind of how does moral injury differ, would you say, from PTSD? Because it sounds like there's a little bit of overlap potentially there.
Absolutely. So you could be in a situation that is both traumatizing and morally injurious. You could also be in situations that are just one or the other. So when we think of trauma, we think of things that take away our sense of autonomy, agency, control, something that threatens us on some level. And so I would say the underlying effects to the nervous system are fear, loss of control. It's very much shaking up the nervous system, so to speak. Whereas moral injury would be shaking up your values and how you show up in the world. So if you're seeing shame and guilt, we might more have moral injury. If we're seeing, oh, I don't know who I am anymore, that could be moral injury. It could also be trauma because when bad things happen to us, it causes us to question our worldview of what is this world we live in? What is my place in it? Is this a safe place? Am I safe? So it's tricky because we question things because of trauma. We also question things because of our values and how we get to show up pursuing them or not. But I would say the biggest overlap is if you see more shame and guilt, that's more moral injury, more fear and like hyper or hypo arousal in the nervous system, that's more trauma. But of course, those can overlap.
Absolutely. That's incredibly helpful to understand and to hear kind of how the two differ and how the two overlap a little bit as well.
Um,
But that is so helpful to kind of see how we can distinguish between moral injury and PTSD, but also how the two can kind of overlap in certain ways as well. And it's possible to really experience both as well. And
mhm,
what makes moral injury complicated for us to address both as an individual and within the context of the individuals who are kind of part of the moral injury that's occurring or the entity like a corporation from which we sustained it. You know, what makes it complicated for us, but also in that kind of group environment that's part of it.
mhm. So I think what's tricky is sometimes, like if we again compare to trauma, um, often, but not always, right? If someone has sustained trauma, they are then out of that situation. And so we're reteaching the body, hey, you are safe now. Hey, that thing was in the past. It's, it can't hurt you anymore. We're processing through so that we can deal with how life is currently instead. With moral injury, oftentimes these are wounds sustained in a work environment.
Mhm.
And so you're really forced into this place of, okay, if you want to keep your job, does that mean you keep getting injured? If you want to do your job, which presumably you felt called to in some way or another, whether it was for purpose or for the sheer finances of it, now you're risking that. So we actually saw a lot of nurses leave the field after the COVID-19
Yes.
pandemic. And I have no question that some of that at least was in part from moral injury and just sheer exhaustion sustained during the pandemic.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It definitely was.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then what are some of the potential impacts of sustaining or experiencing one or more, which it's often more, moral injuries in your career?
Yeah, so I think we see that that shame and guilt coming out, right? We
Mm.
see questions of identity come out. When we have done something, participated in, not participated in, observed something that goes against who we think we are, then our brains try to reconcile this of, well, this is who I am and this is what I value. But this is what happened and what I did or didn't do. And so that creates a certain level of cognitive dissonance that then we struggle to resolve. And so we can either resolve that as, okay, I am still who I am, and this thing is just a thing in time, that there were probably extenuating circumstances outside of our control. Or sometimes what we do is say, oh, well, maybe I am a bad person. If I did this bad thing, maybe I'm not who I thought I was. And that can feel very jarring for a number of reasons. One, most of us don't like to think of ourselves as bad people. But two, even if you just think of yourself as one way and now are suddenly unmoored and unanchored to that idea of yourself, now we have this space of, well, who am I? Do I really know anything? And it can snowball into this effect of, how do I know anything? How have I figured out who I am? Maybe I'm wrong about so much more. And so we kind of see where this can go um this can snowball.
Yeah, no, I can absolutely see that. I've seen that in colleagues with companies I've worked with who I've known very, very well, which have kind of given me some insight into their uh, experiences with moral injury. Again, none of us knowing that it was called moral injury at the time, but very much so, and has seen how it has affected them to the point with some people that they have had to leave their jobs and find other jobs
Yeah.
because they were continually experiencing moral injury, and it was really detrimental to them as a person. And so I can see in your point about it snowballing. In your experience as a mental health professional, why is treating a client who has experienced moral injuries kind of a complicated uh, thing to treat and tricky to do so?
Yeah, that's so fair. It can be tricky because when we think of therapy, there's a certain overarching umbrella of, well, just pursue your values. Let's be mindful about what's happening to us. Um, you know, how would you like to think about yourself positively? That's kind of the fluff fluff therapy, I would almost call that. It's all good things, but
Yeah.
it's the very surface level, right? So, one of the things therapy helps do is therapy is a relationship. So we can learn, we can read every book, listen to every podcast, but until we have a relationship, particularly when we are dealing with wounds that have created shame, shame tells us hide. Shame tells us there's something wrong with me. Shame tells us they won't like me. I'm not safe. I need to hide. I'm not accepted. So
Mhm.
to be in a therapeutic relationship where somebody else is showing unconditional positive regard towards you, despite your shame, despite this thing that you feel you had no choice but to do or not do, that in and of itself can be incredibly healing. So it becomes an onus on the practitioner to make sure we don't shy away from these spaces of, people do good, bad, hard, complicated things all the time. As humans, we try to put people and actions into boxes. This is right, this is wrong, this person's good, this person's bad. But life is a lot more complicated than that. So to recognize, hey, this person maybe had to do something that looks bad, but they are hurting about it, which actually, if we think about it, shows that that maybe they're not a bad person because bad people probably don't feel bad about doing bad things. But
True.
so looking at somebody, meeting them in their pain and saying, "Hey, I still accept you, value you, see you as the person you want to be and can be, despite the fact that we live in complicated circumstances that sometimes put things outside of our control." That is a much more nuanced and much more relational conversation.
No, that's an excellent point and such an interesting perspective to hear, because I think for a lot of people, they would say, gosh, either they would fall into one camp, I think, either like, how do you treat this? How do you come back from this? And the moral injuries, and at the same time, oh, is it just treated like, you just will do one thing and you're done? So it really helps to hear kind of from your perspective and working with clients, the nuances that are involved.
Absolutely.
For sure. For
Absolutely.
sure.
If
Yeah,
I could add too,
please.
there's a psychologist, Carl Rogers, who he's the one who basically says that we should approach clients with unconditional positive regard. Like basically, I'm in your corner no matter what. I'm in your corner. And when we think about showing up in this space, what that doesn't mean is, hey, I'm going to take away that wound. That wound happened. I would love it if I had some button I could press that says, "Okay, we can go back and take that away, or we can make it not hurt." Either one of those. A lot of people come to therapy for that. Hey, make it stop hurting. And part of the process of making it stop hurting is not making it so it never happened. It's making it so that we can accept the fact that it happened and continue to make choices that now lead us towards our values. So there's a acceptance, there's a mindfulness that we can say, almost like if you had an actual wound
Mhm.
on your skin. Well,
Yeah,
if I don't accept the fact that that wound is there, either by not treating it or like, I want this off of me. So I keep scratching
yeah,
at the scab and I keep ripping it back up because I don't accept that this is there.
yeah.
But then that's gonna cause, further damage. But if I accept, yeah, I have this wound, I'm gonna treat it with some like neosporin, but I'm also gonna then accept the fact that that scar might be part of me forever. So, how do I become okay with looking down at myself and seeing that scar, but not making the scar define me?
Outstanding way of putting it, and an outstanding analogy. Really appreciate that. And as we wrap up this episode, what are some sustainable long-term coping strategies that people can use to navigate moral injury? Because ultimately, most of us are going to have to navigate moral injury at some point in our lives.
Yes. If we think about this from different therapeutic lenses, there's a
Mm.
couple different ways I would say we can look at this. One would be from narrative therapy, which considers the story we tell ourselves. When we have sustained a moral injury, it is almost like you are reading a book and there is an entire chapter that is in red ink, underlined, bolded. It's there and it's glaring. So narrative therapy would tell us, remember that there's a whole book. There's more to your story than just that chapter. If we look at ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, that would be, let's cultivate mindfulness about what happened. Let's cultivate acceptance, not agreement, not, oh, I'm glad this happened, not, oh, yippee woohoo, but I accept that there is a wound on my arm now. I accept that there is a scar here. Now, what are my values and how do I take sustained action towards my values in the ways I can, in the ways I have control over?
Mhm.
It's exerting agency where we can. And then finally, I would say if we approach this from an IFS lens or an internal family systems lens,
Mm.
internal family systems has the idea that we have all of these parts of ourselves, parts that are wounded, parts that are protectors. With moral injury, there's typically a very wounded part that's like, oh no, I didn't want to do that. There's also a very protective part that tries to make sure that we know we did something bad. That part is generally the part with the microphone going, "You did something bad. You're so wrong. That was terrible. You have to make sure you don't do this again." That part is putting all of that on blast so that we don't sustain more injury. But that part, what it's saying through its microphone, can of course be incredibly painful. So, from an IFS lens, what we do is kind of learn our different parts, learn the ways they're showing up to try to protect us, to try to not be injured. And then we introduce ourself to the picture, kind of see
Mm.
if those parts want to show up a different way, where we still want to be protected, we still want to not sustain injuries. But can these parts that are so worried about something bad happening, can they show up in a different way? What would they do if we took that energy and showed up differently? And so again, we take that self, and here we can blend it with sort of that act values based approach. We take that self in the driver's seat, acting towards our values. And with that narrative therapy, we can rewrite the rest of the story.
Oh, that's absolutely amazing and really exciting to hear. Honestly, really reassuring to hear that there's so many different avenues to healing those moral injuries and to navigating the moral injuries that we do sustain in our lives. So, thank you so much, Emily. Incredibly insightful and helpful. And how can people reach out to you if they'd like to connect?
Yes. So reaching out to Atento Counseling. I work at the Kennesaw location, but I do take telehealth clients, and any one of our guest experience managers can kind of get you on my schedule and scheduled with me.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Emily, for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you, Melissa. I really appreciate this conversation.